Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to get right into it today, but just want to start off with a friendly Zoom reminder. You can see and hear us, but we can't see or hear you. So if you have any questions throughout the session, please pop them into the chat box, and we'll be incorporating your questions into the discussion later in the session, as well as posting answers into the chat as we go through. This session will be recorded and will be available to view on CFC's website after the session, and this session is available in English and in French. So in order to access the language of your choice, please hover your mouse over the bottom of the Zoom screen and you should see a globe appear, and you can select from there French or English, and we are offering live interpretation throughout the event. I'm coming to you today from Ottawa at the home office of Community Foundations of Canada. I just wanted to start off by acknowledging that our Community Foundations of Canada offices and I myself today are on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. My name is Alison Sidney. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Community Foundations of Canada, and I'm going to provide just a high-level overview about the Healthy Communities Initiative this morning. So the Healthy Communities Initiative is a $31 million investment from the Government of Canada to support communities as they create and adapt public spaces to respond to the new realities of COVID-19. With funding available between $5,000 and $250,000, the Healthy Communities Initiative aims to support local efforts to develop small-scale infrastructure solutions, programming and services for communities across Canada. Local governments, charities, Indigenous communities, and nonprofits are all welcome to apply for funding. And organizations can apply to the Healthy Communities Initiative starting now through March 9th, 2021 at 5 p.m. Pacific time for our first round of application intake. You can visit the healthycommunitiesinitiative.ca website to find out more about how to apply, explore resources for applicants, and to sign up for other community mobilization sessions such as this one. A second application round for the Healthy Communities Initiative will take place starting in May of 2021 with a deadline in June. So for today's session, and we're really excited to jump right into it, it will be hosted by ICLEI Canada, and it is on how to write a funding application. Session will talk about how you can learn how to turn an idea into a project proposal, how to build out a project outline, and think through the steps from beginning to end. So you can find out about some of the common hurdles and pitfalls in proposal writing and the best approaches for success. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Eva.
Just have to find that unmute button. Thanks so much, Alison. My name is Eva Jackson, and I'm Managing Director with ICLEI Canada, and I'll be joined in a little bit by my colleague, Megan Meaney, also with ICLEI Canada. I want to start by also acknowledging the land upon which I live, work, and play. ICLEI has 3 offices in Canada, in Toronto, Victoria, and Montreal. I work in our Toronto office, though currently, as many, I am working from home. And I want to acknowledge that we are located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I'll leave it for you to read the traditional territory upon which our Victoria and Montreal office are located. But I encourage you to look into the treaty rights of the Indigenous communities that hold relationships and rights to this land through resources such as the ones that we've listed on the screen. So I'm particularly delighted to be giving this webinar and helping think through the elements that go from taking an idea into a proposal. You all likely have wonderful, important, and beneficial ideas. And the key is to translate a good and important idea into a successful proposal. We're going to speak today in sort of 5 general areas. The first is I'm going to present what we call the 5 building blocks of a successful proposal. And then I'm actually going to hand it over to Megan to go through more of the details of, you have a deadline now, as Alison described. How do you move from those building blocks into submitting that proposal? And then we'll end with some key resources to turn to as you do that. One of the things that I think we have to keep in mind is you only have one chance to present your idea through a written proposal. You have to make sure that you utilize that opportunity as much as possible. Please, though, keep in mind that in general with funding calls, any funding calls, the funding agency assesses all proposals on a competitive basis, and it's against other proposals received within the same funding category. So your ability to explain your project idea with specific reference to how it relates to the fund really is crucial. In most competitive funding processes, meeting the criteria alone does not automatically guarantee that a project will receive funding. As I said, these are competitive processes. So demonstrating your project idea at its best and showing how it meets all of the building blocks we're going to walk through is your best bet for being successful. So with that, I'll start with the first building block. So with this first building block, we're speaking about relevance. And as I said, there's no lack of good project ideas, and there's generally a variety of sources to fund these ideas. The catch here is to match a good idea with the right funding source. And there's a lot of things that we can mean by the term right. The mandate of the fund, your proposal must contribute to that fund to which you're applying. So you have to think about, to what degree does your project idea directly help achieve the objectives of what the fund is trying to do? Does your idea clearly contribute to the themes as they are outlined? How much stretching do you have to do to make your idea fit within a theme? The more convincing that you have to do that it is a good fit, the harder it'll be to put your proposal together. So I think one thing you have to do is focus your proposal in the theme and the locations where you have the most experience, where you have existing relationships, and where those ideas align with local needs. But with all that being said, I think we have to acknowledge and be encouraged to look beyond mainstream and conventional partners to those that may be traditionally underrepresented. So while it's important to focus on what you know, it's also important at the same time to make sure that that is inclusive. The next element to think about with regard to a right fit is whether you or your organization clearly fall within the fund's stated eligibility requirements. Do you need to provide any documentation to demonstrate that, your eligibility, that is? So you need to be aware of what documentation you might need and be prepared to collect and scan anything that might be required. The relevance, then, of a particular initiative or idea refers to its merit in terms of the needs it addresses and to whom that will benefit. So again, within this building block, you should be able to describe why the need addressed by your proposed idea is important and be able to demonstrate that it is highly valued by local beneficiaries. Ultimately, within this relevance building block, you should be able to succinctly and without jargon describe the need addressed by your project, its importance, what will be done to meet that need, by whom, and who will benefit from the project's outcomes. And that brings me to my next point, which is around results and outcomes. Part of thinking about relevance is thinking about how your project's results and outcomes will help to contribute to the fund's mandate, as I mentioned, is one of those key things of fit. There are a few concepts to consider when thinking about results and outcomes. The first is outputs, and outputs are achieved after implementing an activity or project. They're not the reason for designing a project, but rather they are a means to an end. Together, that set of outputs contribute towards achieving a larger outcome. And outputs can typically be measured in numbers. So if you imagine a project centered around heart disease prevention, outputs could include the number of participants in a workshop on prevention, the number of community awareness meetings, the number of doctors or medical professionals involved in your project. Outcomes, however, are the differences made by your collective outputs. They are not achieved right after the implementation of activities or projects, and outcomes can be viewed as the end results. So if the outputs are the means to the end, the outcome is that end. They are what you are striving to achieve through your proposed idea. So going back to the heart disease prevention example, outcomes could be increased knowledge among communities about heart disease prevention, decreased incidences of heart disease. So if that was related to results and outcomes, the other element of results and outcomes is managing risk. In developing your idea and your proposal, you have to have thought through the possible risks related to the delivery of your project idea. You should be able to define the major risks that may affect the achievement of your expected results, the likelihood and the impact that a risk may have, and a summary of any strategies to respond to those risks. And those risks can be operational, so human resource allocations, information management, the reliability of suppliers or vendors you may need, financial, so your ability to comply with financial agreements, either with your funder or with one of your contractees, legal implications, any sort of wrongdoing, or reputational, so a reduction in confidence among your local community you're working with or with partners and stakeholders. So again, using that example of the heart disease prevention project, possible risks include people not attending the workshop. And the way you might address this is by providing invitations in multiple languages, distributed through multiple sources. So being able to document not only the possible risks, but strategies towards addressing them is a really important element. The last piece that I think is important here is that through your proposal, through a successful proposal, you should be able to set up a process that transparently documents lessons learned. And those are both positive and negative along the way. Most funders want to know that their investment can be leveraged to indirectly benefit groups beyond the intended beneficiaries. And outlining a commitment to doing this is an important aspect of sharing results and transparency. So you will now need to think about how you're going to measure your progress on all these items. Your proposal should outline the internal processes you will have in place to monitor progress and risk, and report on progress against those results. This will need to contain information about baseline data or any targets you might have. So for example, in the heart disease prevention workshop example, you may have a target of having 75 medical professionals participate in a workshop. You need to be able to report against that target. And you not only have to be able to monitor your project delivery or the process of delivering your work, but also whether you are achieving your intended results. And all of this needs to somehow, and again, here's that word, succinctly, be contained within your project proposal. So the results and outcomes that you identify will therefore need a sound project design and project plan to be achieved. That proposal needs to include that critical path outlining the sequence, the schedule of activities, and the benchmarks that will be undertaken to achieve those desired results or outputs. At a high level, you'll need to make sure that your approach is tailored to the local context, aligns with any best practices in the sector or sphere, incorporates lessons learned and lived experience of the community within which you're working, and takes into account that broader community context. Now, there are many schools of thought as to how you express this within a proposal. One can do this through a narrative description of phases and tasks. One can do this through a series of bullets that describe key tasks within a project phase, or one can do this through some combination of those two things. Irrespective of the approach that you use, there are key elements that need to be included. So phases, these are the larger swaths of tasks, generally grouped together by a common theme: project initiation, training development, training delivery, and each phase should directly serve a project objective. Then within those are tasks and subtasks, which are grouped together under a phase, and they're the ways you're going to deliver that stated objective. And both phases and tasks should be tied to timeframes that are realistic, but fall within the timing guidelines as expressed by the given fund's applicant guidance. So for example, if the fund you're applying to requires that all projects are completed within a year, and the work you're trying to do involves planting or some sort of activity in shorelines or gardens, you need to make sure that in your time frame you've allocated your planting or at a season that's not going to be affected by inclement weather. So for example, it cannot be now in February as the ground's frozen. Can it be in August? Is it too hot in August? You need to, timing is really important, both in terms of the completion of tasks, but also any physical or natural limitations to completing that task. Lastly, you'll need to consider how your activities relate to each other and where does the delivery of one task rely on the absolute completion of the task prior. And given those kinds of interdependencies, whether what you have proposed can realistically be completed within that given time frame. Now, the last component of planning and project design is the budget, the ever important financial plan for your project. Here's where, and I can't stress this enough, it is vitally important that you consult any guidance that the fund you are applying to provides. Are all the costs you're planning for eligible within the fund? Do you have any matching contributions you might need, either cash or in kind? How does the fund want that budget broken down? By phases and tasks, by eligible costs, by hourly or daily rates? All those things need to be thought through. And finally, I think it's important to show that, have you demonstrated that you are using the budget effectively? Does your project approach yield good value for money? Are you achieving any possible economies of scale within delivery? Are you maximizing financial resources? All those concepts together make up that critical path for how you would deliver your project. 2 more building blocks, we're getting there. So the next is around partnerships and collaboration. And big challenges need broad coalitions. And many funds, and particularly ones that address systemic or so-called wicked problems, require collaboration and partnerships. And there are a variety of ways to collaborate and engage, ranging from just informing local communities to full, equitable, non-hierarchical partnerships. And you will need to determine the degree to which you want to collaborate. But when thinking about local partners, it's important to consider including underrepresented groups and individuals versus working with mainstream organizations. What are partner roles? Are they equitable? Does everyone contribute to decisions? How is attribution and authorship being considered? Do all contributors have attribution in the project materials, reports, publicity? And how are budgets allocated? Are you considering the value in financial terms of contributions from local partners and community members? So if that's with your formal partners, in terms of community engagement, so not partnerships to deliver your project idea, but engagement with any groups or beneficiaries of your project idea, first off, have you built this sufficiently into your project design at the early stages? For example, if your ideas to promote outdoor winter participation in a given location, have you planned to talk to community members about what's holding them back, what they would like to see in their community? Your project idea has to consider that local context, and cultural history, the impact that your idea will have to that local community, that key stakeholders, and that could be local authorities, so the municipal government, the band council, or any other key community organizations or groups support the project and its relevance locally. And then finally, the legacy of your project moving forward, beyond the time in which you will be involved. And that brings me to the last building block. And on that idea of legacy, this building block refers to how you see your project idea sustaining itself when funding support ends. Now, I acknowledge that sustainable results and results into the long term often depend on some sort of continued availability of either human, financial, or physical resources. But your proposal to any funder should include some strategy that can demonstrate how these resources will be sustained after the project is formally completed. or in the very odd instance, why that might not be necessary. And one element of an idea's sustainability is local ownership of the project concept. Does the idea you proposed respond to the needs, priorities, and approaches identified by a local community? This is why building in community engagement, as we had talked about in the previous building block, is so important. It really helps to build that case for your idea to be sustained into the long term. Fundamentally, it means that local partners and community members believe in the project and are willing to take responsibility in some sense for its success into the long term. That ownership really is often dependent on the capacity of local partners and participants to eventually assume full responsibility to maintain the project functioning and to develop those outcomes. Because you'll recall from an earlier building block, those outcomes, they happen into the mid and long term. So you really need the project to be sustained to start seeing those deeper, meaningful results. Your proposal should speak to the project's objectives to either improve, reframe, or retool skills and capacities within a local community. And there's different ways to build capacity. You know, you can have opportunities for learning by doing, training and technical assistance, networking and knowledge exchange opportunities, investments into an organization's or group's development, and the development of resources and products to raise capacity. So that brings us to the end of these conceptual building blocks of a proposal. And now I'll hand it over to my colleague, Megan, who can speak to some of the practicalities of doing all this when you're faced with that looming proposal submission deadline. Megan?
Thanks, Eva. Thanks, everyone. Nice to be here. My name's Megan Meany. I'm the Executive Director of ICLEI Canada. And I want to take us from these kind of high-level conceptualization ideas moving into practicalities. You got to move this idea in your head, or maybe you've shared it amongst your team. You got to move it into a proposal, a written proposal that can be submitted and evaluated by people who they just don't have a window into your mind, right? So you need to make your ideas clear to others. And where I really like to start is with building a project work plan. Sometimes it's called a workflow or a Gantt chart or a project schedule. I think Eva referred to it earlier as a critical path. And you can use all sorts of complex software, or you can use really simple spreadsheets. You'll work with whatever it is your preference or is maybe standard in your organization. But I find the key step is itemize your phases, your tasks, and your deliverables. Literally write them in a spreadsheet in order. They're going to look different for every project, but they'll probably include some kind of project launch, an inception phase where all the parties agree on the finalized work plan. You might have a design phase, an implementation phase, maybe a place where you review and revise. You conclude, you take some lessons learned, maybe you do some dissemination. And then I like to move on to establishing a timeline and dependencies. So lay out each week or month and imagine when your tasks will occur. Are they falling over major holidays or seasons that aren't relevant to your project? Note where you have dependencies and where you don't. Some delays are going to cause a domino effect in your project, and other delays won't. They might be able to run concurrently. Schedule your key meetings. Some may be flexible, but others might require really long lead ups and preparations. Others might need to be booked really well in advance. You should try to weave in contingencies. Our tendency is to put together these work plans and show a best case scenario. But that's not really always helpful. And it's nice to bring a dose of realism into these work plans as well. So really take that critical look. And then you can start allocating staff time and resources. Literally estimate how many hours or how many days per task per person. And then you can really quite easily calculate a budget. Tally up your total hours or your total days. Figure out if you're using day rates or percentages of salaries. Start allocating your hard costs. Figure out how you're dealing with taxes. And you can start to see how your budget breaks down per person or per task or per phase or per fiscal year. You can literally start slicing and dicing it any way you might want. So I find even if a funder isn't asking you to present a project work plan like this or a Gantt chart, It's a really highly valuable thing to do. It gives you a lot of information about the whole project in one concise chart. Maybe you just want to pull out the timeline or the budget for aspects of your proposal write-up, and you can hide cells and pull from this master chart. I find by having this master chart, you avoid creating conflicting copies as your proposal starts to evolve in your development phase. So now I'm going to move on to common hurdles and pitfalls. Thanks, Eva. So what Eva and I never told you, we work for this organization called ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. It's a nonprofit organization. Fundraising is a big part of what we both do. And we've both been at the organization for about 20 years. I think it's a conservative estimate to say that we write about 12 proposals per year. So over 20 years, that's 240 proposals. And we're partners in many others as well. And from time to time, we find ourselves on evaluation committees. Full disclosure, we're not part of any sort of evaluation committee for the Chi-Chi proposal evaluations, but we have been in many others. So this is where we're drawing these kind of common pitfalls and hurdles that we've seen. First is around fit, and Eva mentioned this in the relevance section. Is this the appropriate fund to bring your project to? Or are you trying to fit a square peg into a round hole? I often see organizations want to shop around an idea for a project to a variety of funders. And rarely does that work when you're dealing with a call for proposals that has a very specific set of objectives. So check yourself and ask yourself the question, am I trying to get my pre-designed project funded, or am I trying to design a project that fits the funder's needs? They're two very different things, and I think you're going to have more success with the latter. Eva touched on this one too, eligibility. Dancing around what organizations are really eligible, I find is a really common pitfall. Most funds or calls for proposals are very, very particular about this. What kind of legal entity is your organization? Some people working at your organization or that you're working in partnership with don't know this. It's not always common knowledge. For instance, like a charity and a nonprofit in Canada are not the same thing. And if your organization happens to work across borders, international borders, or national borders, definitions around these types of legal entities are very different in different countries. So really pay attention to this before you invest so much time and effort. Eligibility criteria are really black and white, and no amount of sort of salesmanship or wishful thinking will change this. My next one, it's kind of funny, but your title. Think of the many ways in which your title will be used and who will be using it. And apply one that can be used beyond the application period, well into sort of the long life of your project. I've seen some projects haunted by an old title that seemed fitting at the time, but then it didn't make a lot of sense in the long run. I want to hit again on project importance. I see a lot of people jumping in with what they think is a great idea without demonstrating the need for it. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should, of course. You really need to think about, has something like this already been done by another organization maybe? How is what you're doing different? How will it lead to different results? Funders want to fund something sort of new and innovative that builds on knowledge and past experience. So demonstrate that you have some knowledge in the field you're in and the direction you need to go, and how or the direction you think the field should go and how your project can take it there. I see a lot of project proposals that lack a really meaningful connection to communities and collaborators. It sort of pains me to see this. Projects that try to serve a community, but not done in collaboration with a community. So when you have these kind of collaborations, they should be formalized. They shouldn't be speculative. Partners should be able to articulate their role in their own voice, make it very clear in the work plan. Who's doing what budget allocation there is to support the engagement. And the budget should represent the full cost of the project. Partners aren't there for your in-kind support to build up your own project, right? We need to make sure those partners are all recognized and financed for their work. And then kind of linking to this is leadership. I often see proposals with a lack of decision-making kind of framework among collaborators. How will decisions be made? How will conflict be resolved? Who's ultimately responsible? Who holds liability? Thinking through this kind of serves the partners well in defining their relationship. And it also shows the funder that they can trust that you have solid relationships that aren't likely to go south over disagreements within the project. And that kind of links to risk management. I'm always surprised about how little some of this gets in proposal writing. And Eva mentioned some of this as well. Really think through what some of those obstacles you may face are in your project and identify strategies to overcome them. That might relate to the collaboration or leadership element I was talking about, but it could also just be things like staff turnover or volunteer burnout or whatever relates to yours. Talk about how you will overcome those. Build some confidence in your funder to let them know that you can, ebb and sway as needed with the project. And measuring and reporting progress. Sometimes you really see a lack of a clear picture of what success in this project looks like, how you'll measure it and how you'll know whether or not it's achieved. Eva talked about this as well. Put some qualitative and quantitative indicators in there, and in your work plan, identify how you're going to gather that information. It's pretty important. And then budget. You see a lot of proposals that have ineligible expenditures in them. So you really want to ensure that you're only including what is eligible, right? This is really particular, just like I was saying the eligibility criteria are. So go through the budget requirements with a fine-tooth comb. It's a really specialized skill. And if you have finance people in your organization, you really should engage them in that part early on in your proposal development process. And then moving on to the next slide, I just have a couple of sort of tips and tricks along the way. First is review all the guidance and material that's available to you before you really start writing your proposal. Usually a few pieces of material are available beyond just the application form. We have this common tendency to just jump right in with both feet, and you end up addressing what you consider are priority points kind of in the wrong sections of the proposal. When you're dealing with word limits and evaluators, you need to address priorities where they're prompted. And you might notice in the evaluation you might notice things in the evaluation criteria that aren't specifically prompted for in the application. So you'll want to weave those in as you answer the key questions. You might even find inconsistencies in the various materials available to you. These are all prepared by humans, after all. So you have an opportunity to seek clarification where it's needed. Organize what elements you'll cover within each section of the proposal. I see so many proposals start out with everything, all in the project outline. You got to pace yourself, especially when you're dealing with word limits, right? Figure out where everything is. The evaluators are reading the whole thing, not just the introduction. And then these next two. Confirm partner relationships in writing. Saying is not showing, right? So let the partners speak with their own voice, with their own signatures and their own logos, and request letters of support early to allow for sign-off periods. Sometimes sign-off is a high-level decision in an organization and it can take weeks. So start this early, and you'll probably need to provide, a sample letter that can be edited, right, to just facilitate the process. And you might need to request these letters before you have the full project proposal written. So you might be dealing with a bit of a chicken and an egg situation. So consider that. And then leave time for review by collaborators. Have someone who's not familiar with the proposal review it for clarity and style. If you're anything like me, after reading the same thing over and over again, you stop seeing your own mistakes. And then leave plenty of time for uploading and editing. Often, the way I often approach this is I'm working in a word processor, just because that's, the way I like to work. You need to leave plenty of time for that uploading and editing. Online submission forms are often finicky. Do they work in your browser? Are there character limits where you aren't expecting them? I know of many missed deadlines due to technical difficulties or internet problems. You don't want to see all your hard work lost due to a missed deadline. And online systems are known to crash on the day a proposal is due. So save yourself the stress and go out ahead of it. I've had my heart broken. I've shed tears over missed deadlines, and I've seen others do it themselves as well. So just try to get out ahead of it, I say. And I think I just have one more slide. I really want to drive this one home. These are the key resources that are available to you for this fund, right? You have your application form in PDF. There is an application guide. There's the equity guidance, which really has some prompts for you to consider for equitable partnerships and programming and community engagement. You've got the evaluation criteria, the glossary, the budget template, and then there's some other supporting materials like the intermediary agreement, the application screencast, the launch event recording, in addition to obviously the CFC portal for your online application. There's so much you want to look over here before you jump right in. And of course, there's all these community mobilization sessions, so take advantage of them all like you're doing. And I think I'm pretty close to the end. It's really kind of CFC and CUI and all the partners involved have been so inspired by the flood of project ideas this call is generating. So I hope like these tips and tricks that Eva and I have provided here will help you shape what are already great ideas into winning proposals. And of course, I wish you the best of luck in doing that. So now I'm going to hand it over to Rupal, who's going to lead us through the Q&A, I believe.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that. That was an amazing presentation that I know will be applicable to so many grants and funding opportunities that people have coming up. So thank you for that. I'm joined by Allison from Community Foundations of Canada. My name is Rupal. I work at CUI, and I'm just here to facilitate a quick Q&A. So before we get to Allison, there's actually one question that I think is fantastic that I'm not sure has been answered yet from Megan or Eva, which is, what does attribution and authorship actually mean in the context of a type of project like you might be proposing to the Healthy Communities Initiative? And can you give a quick example of when the concept of authorship or attribution might come up?
So maybe I'll start, because I've been thinking about all these examples as I was putting together my slides. And I think I'll switch to the winter activity one from heart disease, because I feel like I know more about winter activities than heart disease. So let's say in that example we talked about where you want to mobilize people to get outdoors when it's 30 below. And one of the things is you want to reach out to new Canadians. So you might get a partner from any given community group, let's say the South Asian community. Well, in acknowledging their work, in having them participate, you need to acknowledge their efforts. And that's acknowledgement financially through honorariums or a fee for their services, but it's also less tangibly. So with their association name on your materials, in having them be a messenger of the project, they can say our project and not this project that I'm delivering on behalf of somebody else, so that they feel that their efforts are not just, and I don't mean to sound kind of crass about it, they're not being used, that they really are a fundamental partner in that activity. And without them, less success could be achieved. And so I think if you are on the same page about that collaboration, then you need to acknowledge that in the same way. And I think this fund is a really good example of that. There are some of us partners who are delivering these community mobilization sessions, but both CFC and CUI include our logos on the materials and value our participation in this work. And so I think you can see that, we're trying to walk the talk, so to speak, and not just the walk. And I think it's important that you build that into any proposal to have with that legacy in mind.
Thank you. That was great. Really, really helpful. So the next question is for Allison. If I'm a business owner in my community, or maybe just a really active community member who has a really great idea for this program, can I apply myself?
That's a great question. So individuals and businesses on their own are not eligible to apply for the Healthy Communities Initiative. There is a long list of eligible organizations available in the applicant guide. And so for those who are interested but not eligible, we encourage you to reach out and get in touch with local community organizations, your local BIA, or other eligible organizations to find out if there's a way that you can collaborate and partner and submit an application together.
Great, thank you. And what if I submit an application on behalf of my organization in round 1 and it doesn't get funded? Can I come back in round 2?
Yes. So if you're unsuccessful in round 1, you can certainly resubmit with new changes and things like that for round 2. There's just no guarantee that you'll be funded in round 2 if you were declined in round 1.
And for those of us who have applied to many different funding programs before, they all have different rules. And sometimes the funding program really wants you to have matching funding or won't fund 100% of your project costs. Can you talk a bit about that as it relates to this program?
Sure. So there's no requirement for matching funding for this program. So anything that you submit in your application can be 100% funded by this funding stream. Some other things to note on that question are if you do have other funding sources, they just need to be covering distinct budget items or specific expenses. So we can't cover the same thing twice. We can't pay for the same thing twice. So that's the only kind of stipulation around that.
And my next question is one that I'm sure a lot of people have, which is, can they apply to this fund to make their offices more COVID responsive?
Right. Yes. Understandable. I think that's a large need right now, but unfortunately this fund, under this fund, those types of projects are not eligible. So this fund intends to support projects that cover things that are publicly accessible that take place in public spaces.
And would the school playground in my neighborhood be considered an example of public space?
That is a great question. So if the school land is public land and it's accessible outside of school hours, so it's publicly accessible and the school is not private itself, that would be eligible. We just recommend reaching out to us at CFC via email for more information. And the email is chci@communityfoundations.ca.
Perfect, thank you. I'll give you a little bit of a break and ask Megan and Eva to maybe jump in. A couple of really good questions just about general proposal writing. The first is somebody who's been told in the past, and I think a lot of us have heard this, not to get too personal in their applications. Don't say we, talk about yourself in the third person and keep that formality. Is that still the case?
I think it really depends on the kind of organization you are. Right? Like some organizations really are sort of a kind of small we group, and that's its strength, right? And so like if that's your tendency, you feel that is your strength, play it up. But there's going to be some maybe larger organizations where these decisions are kind of made at the kind of strategic governance level where it's less of a we and more of an organizational approach.
Right, so just be authentic.
I think it also depends on the project, right? Some projects are super we driven, right? They're about people coming together and doing something together. It feels weird to say the partners are going to. It sounds quite sealed and scientific when you're trying to demonstrate something that isn't that is really about coming together and communal work. And so I think it's kind of an old school rule to say everything has to be in the third person. So I totally agree with Megan, like write what feels right, because that's going to read well to your reviewer, and write what fits with what you're trying to say.
And what kind of advice would you give someone who really is coming from that grassroots we context, who it maybe has a fear that their grant writing skills or their proposal writing skills can't match up to a larger organization that might have somebody on staff to do that work? What's the advice you would give to them?
So that one I typed in to the chat box. I'm just going to reiterate what I wrote, because I feel like this is where people have a tendency to think bigger is better. And yes, somebody might have a grant writer, but that grant writer doesn't know about the project idea necessarily. They're just, you know, for all intents and purposes, a smooth talker. But if you are proposing something that you're passionate about and that you know about and you've been working on as a volunteer for X number of years, you are the expert on that. You are the expert on your local community. So scale your proposal to the effort that your organization can handle and the project you want to do, but there's nobody better suited. Like you could pay tens of thousands of dollars to have somebody else write it, but you're still going to have to tell them everything. So just channel that energy into writing that proposal.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Back to Allison for a few minutes. There is a question about advice that you might offer an organization that is concerned about getting permissions and permits from the municipality. So if you're planning a project where you think you might need a permit, how should you proceed? And do you need that permit in order to apply?
That's a great question. So yes, I think that permits are going to be something that come up a lot in this project for the nature of the projects that we're seeking to fund. And so I would say, you know, as early as you can, start those conversations, start to figure out what kind of permits you might need, inquire with your local or regional authorities to determine which permits, permissions, or approvals you may require. And receiving funding approval through this funding program is a separate process to that of receiving any local permits, permissions, or approval. So just want to really emphasize that that takes place at the local community level often. And so there's more examples and context provided in our applicant guide, but to answer kind of the second part of your question, Rupal, yes, permits are required. So in a case where a project needs a permit to move forward, we need to see proof of that permit before the funding is able to be distributed. When it comes to the application, you know, just indicate that you're working on it or that it's in the works. But before that check is mailed, the permit needs to be confirmed. So that's just a really important piece to be mindful of.
Great, thank you. So let's say there are a number of people on this call who want to share this session and other sessions with their friends who aren't able to make it. Where are they able to see those? How can they see recordings of the past sessions?
I believe those are on the CFC website. The folks working in the chat can provide a link as to where those will be shared. I believe they're on our events page, but I will leave it to them to confirm the specific URL.
Perfect. Let me move back over to the folks from ICLEI for another question. Is it important to use the word limit? This is another kind of general proposal writing question. The tension between using up all of the space and possibly not giving as much detail as is required. So what do you think about word limits? How do you attack them, for lack of a better word?
First thing I do is just check how many words will fit in the box, like literally check. And each box might be different. Like forms are finicky and they might say they have a certain word limit, but your experience is another one. So check those things out first. And I think reviewers appreciate, you know, conciseness. If there's lots of space and no word limit, they don't mean go on forever. You know, as long as you're getting your points across and you're articulating, you know, what you want to say. Then I think you shouldn't necessarily, you know, more isn't better.
I think Megan brought up a really good point in her pitfalls, which is don't try to put all your answers into the first box. There's a lot of questions, and really think about what the question's asking versus, well, this is everything about my project and it's really amazing. You have to kind of separate them, and then that speaks to, there's multiple boxes with multiple word limits.
And if I'm on this call and I've never written a funding proposal in my life, what are your top 3 tips that you would give me if you only had a minute to give me that advice?
Talk to someone who has. Talk to someone who's failed and won, you know, not just the winners here. What else?
I would say read everything. Read everything, and really read it and answer it in your head before you put that pen down on paper. I really feel like that idea of stretching, like, well, it kind of fits if you look at it through this lens, is like, that's not the right fit if you have to already bend it so much, because your reviewer knows exactly what they want, the type of project their fund is looking to have. So, and you won't have a chance. It's not like a job interview where you make it past paper and you have this in-person opportunity to wow and impress. Proposal writing is just paper. So really your best shot is to read everything with a fine-tooth comb to really understand what they're after and whether what you want to do will resonate with them. So put yourself in the reviewer's shoes, I guess, ultimately is my tip.
Thank you. We are getting close to the end of our time, so I think we've got time for about one more question. Allison, I'm going to pass it to you. It's a new one that's just been added. And it's a good question that I think probably a lot of folks will have, which is, where do we apply when we get on the CFC website? How do we determine whether we're going to one particular stream or another stream? So do we apply to the national organization, CFC, or are folks applying to their local community foundation?
That's a great question. So on our website, there's a big apply button. It will take you to our application portal. And when you get there onto the application portal, one of the first questions will be to identify where you're applying from. And so we have split the country into regions. And so every community fits within a bigger region. And so the map of regions is linked in the form and on our website, so you can quickly identify which region you're in. They're fairly large for the most part. And so you would just select which region that you're applying to. So, you know, they each have a different geography and name. So it's important to understand which region you're in. If you do submit under the wrong region, we can reroute it on the back end, but it just takes a little bit longer. So it's important to make sure you're confirming your region. And there is a separate opportunity on that list on the drop down of regions, which is a cross-regional approach. And so that means that if you want to apply for you know, a new app that's going to span an entire province, or you want to develop I don't know, a pop-up bike lane or something that spans across what the regions are as they're defined, maybe a new trail across a province, that would go into the cross-regional bucket. So for those that don't fit just in one small area, but go across. So those are the two options. That's basically, that helps to route to the right committee to review your project.
Perfect. And just because we can't say it enough, what should somebody do if they have a specific question about their eligibility or their project and they need it answered?
Email us. It's chci@communityfoundations.ca. We see so many great ideas coming through on the chat. In all of these community mobilization sessions, we've seen so many examples provided by subject matter experts. You know, some people, they get really into the weeds of what's eligible. And so our project officers on the CFC team are, you know, well-versed in all of the eligibility criteria. They're the best people to talk to. And they're the ones in the chat right now. And there's a few of them working behind that email. So it's the best place to get the fastest responses that can really get really detailed about eligibility.
Perfect. Thank you so much. On that note, I will hand it off to you, Allison, to close us out today.
Sure, yeah, I have a couple of notes to share, but I just wanted to first say thank you to the ICLEI team so much. It was so nice to sit here as, you know, CFC, wearing my CFC hat and hearing such good advice to applicants. And I just really want to emphasize, you guys did such a great job, and it's going to be really helpful, I hope, for applicants to work on their applications. I just would want to also emphasize, you know, the pieces are, the community engagement is so important, you know, wanting to make sure that the people that you're wanting to serve through your project are represented through the leaders of those who are submitting and working on the project. We're just really excited to see what comes through. There's so many great ideas we've seen. And one other thing I wanted to note just before we close is that the application form itself, we've done a lot of testing. It should take between 18 minutes to half an hour to complete. And the best place to really build out what your application, I see some questions about how do you judge based on a smaller application versus a bigger application. The budget is really the best place to break out how your project is different. And we encourage everyone to right size their application and budget based on the level of funding that they're requesting. And questions like that we can help with over that email address that was shared in the chat as well. And through the applicant material that's available on our website. So thank you again to everybody for joining us today. Thank you to the folks from ICLEI for providing us with this awesome information. If you have any other questions about the Healthy Communities Initiative, you can contact our support team, as I mentioned, at chci@communityfoundations.ca. And we're now going to host a short feedback poll, which should appear on your screen. And thank you so much for your input and your feedback. We do have 2 more community mobilization sessions coming up. The first is on Monday, the 22nd with Mars Discovery District, and that will be on digital solutions, ideas to support people and communities during a pandemic. And then another one again on Wednesday, the 24th with Vivonville on how to create safe and lively public spaces and improve mobility options. So I think we will wait for some of those answers to come in, but thank you everyone so much for joining us today.